Okay, our session is being recorded. At least it says it is. I've had a little trouble with WebEx tonight getting started, but now it seems like we're okay. Okay, here we are, week 4. Finally, I guess finally, you could say finally, you're going to actually turn in an assignment. Now remember, this course was designed to give you plenty of time to learn and try and do things, because unlike other courses, you are graded on what you can do, not necessarily what you know. So you have to show evidence of things that you're accomplishing, such as learning how to frame problems, learning how to use decisions first software. And of course, starting next week, we'll be moving into some modeling, building some models with a package called Prediction. So this week you should look for your access to your prediction accounts. I'm waiting on the company to send me the access information now. But meanwhile, this is the week to finish up your framing assignment. And again, I know some of you have asked for a lot more specifics than I like to provide. You've got specifics of what you need to do, basically, in the assignment guidance. But I don't like to structure it so much that they all look exactly the same. Now, you know, there's a good reason why innovation is so important these days, and creativity, and things look a little differently. So, you know, you've got about all the guidance you're going to get. It's kind of up to you. If you're framing a problem, what is it you think you need to put in there? And so that's the real test of whether you can frame it or not. Now, that may not leave you feeling real comfortable, but you'll do fine. Okay? So this is an opportunity. And again, I know it's a made-up problem. You have to pick sort of from standard kinds of analytical problems to sort of frame. And you're going to have another opportunity at the end of the course to frame a real problem. And then perhaps when you get to the practicum in the program, you'll be using the same software to frame a real problem, a much larger problem. Having said that, tonight's lecture, presentation, whatever you want to call it, is smaller. You notice up here there are only 16 view graphs, not the usual 30 to 40. And that's for a couple of reasons. One, I don't want to introduce too much new material with the week of your assignment being due. I know the teams are coordinating and things like that. And secondly, you're going to be spending a lot more time in the upcoming weeks learning predictions, so it sort of balances out. Now, there was a good question or two asked this week about the outline. You know, I have the outline requirement in there basically just to give me a warm, fuzzy feeling that your group is up and running and has a plan. Okay, I'm not grading the outlines. So if you submit the outline, just if you put it somewhere in your team work area, that's fine. You don't really need to submit it as part of the assignment. You can. But I'd like to just feel comfortable that the teams are organized, working, and heading towards success. You don't want to find any surprises when you get to the end of the 4th week and people say, well, I never was able to log in to Decision First, or I never was able to get my teammates to answer my emails, or I never was able to decide, we were never able to decide on a problem. No, we can't have those kinds of things. So the little outline, a very skimpy, basic one, sort of tells me that the teams are up and running and doing well, and that's good. Okay? All right, well, this week I want to talk a little bit about assessing the organization's analytic maturity. I think I've said this before, but I'm a huge believer over many years of experience that what gets measured gets changed. What gets measured gets changed. I see a question. I will probably not give you any feedback on your outlines unless I find them terribly unacceptable. Okay, so a good question, but no, you'll get feedback on the final assignment, but not on the outline unless it's nowhere close. Then I try to give you a warning or something. Whoops, let me get rid of that menu. Let me go back to what I was saying. What gets measured gets changed. Now, sometimes it gets changed for the better. Sometimes it gets changed for the worse. But if you don't measure something, it's quite easy to say, oh, how's morale? I think it's pretty good, or it's pretty bad, or how's this coming, or how's that coming? Oh, I think we're making progress. I think it's different than last year. You know, I worked in the government for a long time, and we would have these great ideas. We'd have meetings, but we never measured we never had KPIs for progress goals or anything on half the things we wanted to do. And of course, they didn't happen. So if you can measure something, even if you have to measure it somewhat subjectively, you at least have a peg point in the ground. And next year or next month or next 6 months, when you measure it again using that same methodology, you can sort of figure out if you're fairly consistent, whether that you've advanced or regressed in that. Well, the same exact thing holds for your organization's analytic maturity. I've already mentioned several times how important I think it is to try to nudge or push or lead your organization towards a more evidence-based management style, and that includes the use of analytics. More and more the surveys show up that way. More and more the information rolls in that's what people need. That's what organizations want. They want insights. They want to be able to move their organization forward based on hard evidence, based on data, big or little data, but based on data. So how do you do that? Well, one way to do it is to measure the analytic maturity of your organization at this point, and then measure it again periodically to see if you're actually progressing. And we do have measurement scales. There are actually 2 or 3 out there. I think I like, well, none of them are perfect. None of them are exactly what I want, but I don't have my own to suggest. So I'm not too critical of others who do have tools. And as you know already, I'm a big fan of these kinds of tools. We've looked at tools for how you make decisions and so forth. Yes, they're somewhat subjective, but they're still better than just sitting around and saying, I think we're progressing. I think we're doing okay. You may or may not be doing okay. So we do have an analytic maturity tool, and we'll talk about that. Now, what's important, again, is to use that tool and assess where you are without feeling bad or good about that. And then each year, hopefully, move up the food chain a little bit with that. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. And again, as I said, a short lesson tonight. Okay, analytics quotient, maturity model. What is it measuring? Well, this is the one from IBM, which I think is probably the best of the lot. Now, again, none of them are perfect. None of them are as all-encompassing as I'd like to see. I think we will see better ones come along. The INFORMS, and I'm a member of INFORMS, the Information and Operations Research Management Science Society. I have been for a long time. They have one they've just come out with. I haven't had a good chance to look at that, but I'll provide you with a link to it. I think the IBM one is still my favorite, although there's a little twist on the one that I'll show you a little bit later on, a different one, a little twist that I like. But anyway, this one is pretty good. We have maturity models for a lot of things. It started with the capability maturity model for software development from Carnegie Mellon, and it has now spread. We have maturity models for Six Sigma. We have maturity models for just about everything. And I like those. Again, I'm a big fan of tools because, again, I think you have to measure things and then say, okay, here's where we are. Quite honestly, let's see if we can do better. So what is this one doing? Well, here's the definition. The analytic quotient maturity measures your readiness, ability, and capacity. That's 3 good pieces, right? Readiness, ability, and capacity to locate and apply insight. Now, that's key because it doesn't say your ability to build models. It doesn't say your ability to make a logistic regression model or your ability to build a decision tree or your ability to build a neural network. It says locate and apply insight, thereby reorienting your business to make better decisions that deliver better outcomes. Better decisions has been a theme from day one for this course. It measures your ability to act based on understanding history and context from the past, and your ability to make insightful forecasts, anticipate likely outcomes, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so what we're saying is here is we have to be able to take past data and gain insights from that, and then operationalize it. Well, that sounds a lot like the mantra we preach for the course from Tom Davenport and James Taylor and others. We want to be able to say, here's a problem. Here's some past data similar to what we face now. If we can glean some insights from that, which usually means building a model, of course, and then operationalize that, we're in good shape. And by the way, that big gap on operationalizing, sort of what I talked a little bit about last week with the talent dividend, there's the gap. We got a lot of people who are good at building the models. They understand the math. They understand how to torture the data till it confesses, as we used to call it. They can clean the data. They can organize the data. And then when they build a model, they wash their hands of it and say, I'm done. No, we have to take the next step and turn it into some sort of operational change. So I like the definition because that's sort of the way I feel about it. Now, IBM did a survey as they were developing the model. Analytically mature organizations 3 times more likely to outperform their less mature competitors. I would think that would be enough news right there to get everybody saying, wow, we have to get more analytically mature. And what better way to assess that than do an assessment every once in a while. Top performers, 5.4 times, a weird number, but 5.4 times more likely to use an analytic approach. Investments to improve efficiency and business insight, 2 times higher. EBITDA, well, that's a finance term, but it means earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and administrative expenses. But it just means you're making more money. You're doing better, okay? 15% higher return on invested capital. So this was part of what they found. So again, support for the idea of becoming more analytically mature. Okay, there's a couple of components to the analytic capability maturity model that IBM has. First, there's a numeric score that they calculate based on answers to 15 multiple choice questions. Now, that's not a lot of questions. Multiple choice, you may or may not have enough knowledge of your organization's analytical capabilities to answer those questions, because here's a sample here on the screen. But if not, you certainly could ferret that out. And again, you'd see that it's pretty straightforward in terms of the answers. What's the quality of the information you use? What's your strategy? Have you documented successful outcomes? What percentage of your decision makers use analytics? How do you anticipate future events and results? Too many organizations are still using the old school hunch and intuition because they either don't feel comfortable with analytics, or they think it costs too much, or they think it's too complex, or various reasons, okay? Mostly cultural, I would think, because the cost, you can't support that anymore. There are, as you know, from RapidMiner and everything else, there are free programs that aren't bad. There are low-end, relatively inexpensive programs such as Prediction and Big ML and others that are quite good. And then there are high-end programs that are excellent that are reasonably affordable for most companies. The real question is, how do you get past some of the cultural things where people say, I've always done it without any paper or without any of this. The second component maps your answers or your score on that first part to one of 4 stages of increasing analytic maturity. Again, like IQ or EQ, the higher you are, the better you're likely to perform. So if your score comes out under 80, you're novice. If you're 80 to 119 builder, 120, 140 leader, 141 and above master. Okay, 4 stages. So what you might want to do, again, this is voluntary, not graded, but it would be very useful to the class to sort of get an assessment of where most of your organizations are. We're not trying to point the finger at anybody, because you have to start somewhere. Maybe you're a novice. That's great. As long as you recognize that and say we're going to improve on that year to year, I don't think anything wrong with that at all. I think you have to start by saying, where are we? And then, of course, IBM does give you some steps and some proactive things you can do to move up the food chain. So here are the brief definitions of these stages. If you're at stage 1, novice, individual teams analyze their own data, typically using spreadsheets or basic query tools. Okay, that would be something like a dashboard. Knowledge workers have a limited historical view into past performance and rely on large part to gut feel. It's at these early stages that the negative effects of incomplete analytics are most acutely felt. Because you might think, oh, well, we're using some basic tools here. We're really doing well. No, but again, these tools are usually not complete tools, but they're a good starting point. Now, the second stage, you're starting to collaborate across teams. Remember, it's going to turn out, I think it's pretty obvious, that the data scientist, he or she, is not going to be able to do much without collaboration with the functional people who understand what's in the data. It's very difficult, and you'll find this out when you get to some of the other courses in the program. It's very difficult to build good, complex models when your data scientist is not sure what all the variables mean, what they are, or even what the objective is. So it becomes very tricky there. So anyway, it says, again, typically within one department, use historical and current views of data. Decision makers may use dashboards. Okay, so now they've gotten comfortable with dashboards. And dashboards are great. Don't get me wrong. I love Tableau. I teach it in the MBA program. I'll probably be teaching it in this program going forward. But basically, they're a snapshot. They're a view. They say, here's what's happening. They don't necessarily deal too much with what's going to happen or what should be happening or what's the optimal that could be happening or what's most likely to happen next. But they are a good starting point. So they're great. They look at data, more data than you could possibly look at without their nice graphical interface and things like that. Groups operating at this stage have strung together some quick wins necessary to win over their skeptics, which is a good step. See, one of those things you have to realize is your first foray into analytics needs to be successful because there'll be a lot of doubting Thomases waiting for you to fail. So if that first step is a misstep, many times you don't get the opportunity to try again. So it's nice to start with something like a dashboard and some simple kind of a process that says, look, analytics does give us some insights, because you get most people nodding and saying, yeah, with that dashboard, I actually was able to see some things. Now you say, well, how about the next step, predictive analytics? Remember, I showed you a chart saying the next step is sort of predictive analytics, where we try to say, okay, here's what's happening. Let's see if we can, based on that, what's happening and has happened, predict what's going to happen. And then if it's not what we want, we can take some action to prevent that from happening, whether it's doing preventive maintenance in advance, whether it's emailing an offer to people who are likely to churn or leave the company, whether it's stopping or preventing likely fraud, etc. Okay? So now you get to the builder, stage 2. Oh, I'm sorry, wait a minute. We are at the builder. A leader, stage 3. VP level accountability, defined operational and financial metrics. You have to have metrics. Again, if these are unreasonable, the people building the analytical tools and models are going to fail. If someone says, oh, right now we have 20% of our people who leave the company and go to a competitor each month or each year, if you're going to build an analytical model, you'll probably be able to identify every one of those people, and we'll be able to stop them, won't we? No, that's unreasonable. What you're going to be able to do, most likely, is improve on the 20% attrition. But you're not going to eliminate it. You may only improve on it 3 or 4%, but that could turn out to be a huge savings, depending on the situation, depending on the cost, depending on the what it takes to acquire a new customer, etc. So you have to have good KPIs, knowledge performance indicators, to measure success. Starting to use predictive models to evaluate what-if and risk scenarios. Automating decisions. Again, that's that third piece. When you find remember this is James Taylor's mantra, when you find a repeatable operational decision and can build a good predictive model that encapsulates that, usually in the form of rules, which we'll see a lot of when we get to Big ML, our third software package, you operationalize that. Why have people doing that? Why not turn that into an automated system and let people work on problems that we can't yet automate? Okay, moving them up. Teams operating at this stage dive deep into their data to drive a wide-ranging impact. And it's unlikely for individuals, teams, or organizations to promote a strategy, pursue a tactic not supported by analytics insights. So what have they done here? Well, if you go from stage 2, where you're really starting to get into it, minor successes, into stage 3, that's a big jump. You have crossed the chasm, as we say, and I'll say more about crossing the chasm. You probably have heard about that term before, but if not, I'll explain it to you shortly. And then master. These are the people that really are leveraging. Everyone, regardless of their role, knows the objectives and how they can collaborate. In other words, it's become the norm. Okay, it's the norm. Analytics-driven decisions are no longer the exception, but the rule. So that's the master. It'll be hard to get to that. We talked about the various stages. Okay, you can take the quiz there. Sometimes the links disappear, but this should be there. If it's not, just put Analytics Quotient Maturity Model Quiz IBM into your search engine. I've had it show up and disappear a couple of times at various links for some reason. I don't know why it would go away. And then think about how your organization is rated. Are you where you need to be? You don't even, if you don't want to put the number into the discussion area, fine. But at least do it for your own organization, your own sake. Don't fool yourself into thinking your organization is better or worse than it really is. Do an honest assessment if you can, or get people in the organization who do know the answers to those questions to do the assessment. There are case studies there on how organizations have leveraged this, so that's available. But you want to know how your organization is rated, and then you want to periodically redo the survey to see if you're moving up. Now, I said I'd give you a spin from a different tool. This is a different one, from TDWI. You already know how big a fan I am of the Data Warehouse Institute, TDWI materials, especially anything from Fern Halper. Anything from Fern Halper, Halper. Excellent stuff. Well, this is their tool, okay? It's a little different. And they put an interesting aspect in, the chasm. Now, there was a book written called Crossing the Chasm many years ago, and there's an updated version of that, and I use that heavily in the business management kinds of courses I teach in the MBA program. But they talk about 4 challenges. Their approach is a little different. Funding, data governance, skill sets, cultural and political issues. A little different way of looking at where are we, okay? Funding, data governance and data management, skill sets, culture and political issues. There is an on-demand webinar all about their tool, which I think is very interesting for those who have the time. I see somebody's asked, is that the same as crossing the quality chasm? I don't think so. I'm not familiar with crossing the quality chasm. It could be a spin-off. I'm going to say a little bit about crossing the chasm in just a minute. There is an online assessment link. So again, you can do this assessment and see what you think. Now, here's their layout. They categorize your company as nascent, which is similar, just getting started, pre-adoption, early adoption, and then over here they have 5 stages, corporate adoption, and mature visionary. And notice the gap right here. Again, this is similar in going from stage 2 to 3 in the IBM. In other words, this is a big jump. This is a chasm that needs to be crossed, okay? And not all companies make it. So let me give you a little bit of background on Jeffrey Moore's Crossing the Chasm. He wrote this book probably 15 years ago. Well, what he did was study the adoption of technologies, and I would include analytics as a technology, and found that about 3%, well, 2.5% of the world are the true innovators. They come up with something brand new. About 13.5% are the early adopters. They don't wait very long. They say, oh, that's hot. I'm going to go do it. I'm going to get on board right now. Maybe you, like me, bought a Betamax, thinking that would surely triumph over VHS back in the 60s. Of course, it didn't. But, there are other things. So the early adopters are the people and organizations who jump in very quickly. They don't wait for standards. They don't mind spending extra money because things are usually pretty expensive. And they get going early. Sometimes they make the right choice if they picked VHS instead of Betamax, for example. Sometimes they pick the wrong choice. So they're risky people. They take a lot of risks. The sweet spot, from my point of view, is the early majority. The early majority, which is about 34% for almost any technology. By the way, this curve holds almost always. These are the people who say, I've seen enough, which is right about where we are with analytics right now, especially predictive analytics. People have seen enough successes. The tools are there. The cost of the tools is cheap. The ability to actually do the work that needs to be done is getting easier and easier. You don't have to be an advanced rocket science and the world's best software coder to write these things, or even to use something like SaaS products or even the high-end products. And these are the people who've seen enough and they jump on board. And they're called the early majority. But they had to wait until they thought the chasm was reasonable in terms of jumping across it. Okay? You wait too long and you've waited too late, and you're over here, and I'll say something about those in a minute. You go too early and the chasm's too big and it's not ready and you fail. And so, and if you add these up, of course, we're up to about 50% in our bell curve, aren't we? Where are the other 50%? Well, the late majority, and this is again about another third, who say, oh my God, we should have got into this subject a couple of years ago, a few months ago, whatever. And of course, I think you're going to see companies deciding that on analytics real quick. They already are. They're saying, uh-oh, we got to catch up. And then there's an 18% or 16% or so laggards who never ever do it. I probably become, if they stay in business, I don't know how. This was Jeffrey Moore's original premise. He just did a presentation at a conference, which is a pretty good presentation if you have time to go watch, where he updated this based on new technologies and new findings and things, but basically the curve hasn't changed. So when I see something like this chasm aspect, I always think of crossing the chasm. This has been my mantra, having taught emerging technologies for many years, whether it's artificial intelligence or intelligent systems or all the technologies I've taught. I've always preached people that you have to sort of time it just right. When is it right to get my organization across this hole in the mountain, this chasm, and get them into being productive? Okay, so enough about that. There's at least two tools there that you could take a look at, see what you think of. If you want to put your assessment into the discussion area and say something about it, why are you there? Are you happy with where you are? Do you have plans to improve on that? Does it matter at all? Again, this adds to the common understanding of analytics for the whole class, but it's not graded. So the team assignment. Remember, I've asked each team member to submit the assignment. Now you say, well, that's kind of crazy. It's a team assignment. You're going to get 3 identical submissions. And the answer is yes, because I have yet to figure out how in Leo I can give you feedback. The feedback will be the same for your team, but I like to deposit it in each person's folder, so to speak. And unless you submit something, I can't really give you the kind of feedback I want to give you. So just submit it. I know there'll be 3 identical ones. I'm only going to look at one of them, of course, but there'll be 3, or in some cases we've had a little attrition. There'll only be 2. PowerPoint presentation needs to be included. Remember, the original premise was you would build your frame with the decisions first, and then have the opportunity to speak and present on that to the class. Well, we've got too many people in the class now. That worked okay when we had 10 to 12 people at a course, but now with 20-some, it would take too much time. You're going to have that opportunity in the last assignment to build another PowerPoint presentation. So I want to give you some feedback on whether I thought your PowerPoint presentation is ample in terms of presenting a soup to nuts quick view of what's in the paper. You're going to do it again when you do your individual assignment for the last assignment, and you're going to narrate the PowerPoint presentation. So again, if you get some feedback on how well your PowerPoint does what it should do, in other words, it should succinctly, we're talking 5 to 7 slides or so, state, here's what I did, here's why I did it, here's how it came out, and so forth. Okay? And again, I know this is new and a little unstructured, but that's okay. So you should, obviously, there'll be 1 slide about the model, 1 or more slides about the model. Any aspects you want to include, anything special about it you want to say? Fine. Okay, let's say a little bit about upcoming week 5. Week 5, we start a whole new chunk of the course, if you will. We're going to use a software called Prediction. Prediction is an excellent software tool for building analytical models, quite a few. You can build association, cluster, predictive models, etc. You can build multiple models at the same time. You can compare the models. It meets my criteria for software: easy to use, affordable, used in the real world, okay, and useful for class. Okay, so those are criteria. It has good walkthroughs, and I'll probably build a couple more myself. I'll be posting that along with, there's some data sets that you can use for practice. So this is a good place to start for those of you who get finished with your assignment early and want to look at this. You can peek. And of course, if you go to the Prediction website, they've got tons of links. So the way this is going to work, we'll be learning and using Prediction weeks 6 through 8 and beyond. Well, actually weeks 5 through 8. 5 we start with it, 5, 6, 7, 8. In week 7, I'm going to do just a demonstration of a different package to show how an evolutionary or a genetic algorithm works. You won't be using that package. You could. It's free for 30 days, but it's not likely that anyone would. But it does do something distinctly different. And then, of course, weeks 9 and 10, we deal with our third software package, Big ML, which is powerful but a little more narrow in scope than prediction and does something extremely well that we'll talk about when we get there. And then weeks 11 and 12, you're building your final assignment. So as you know, this is my last slide each week. I feel like if there are questions you want to ask right now that you think would benefit the class, feel free. If there are questions during the week that would benefit the class, we have that Let Me Have Any Questions discussion area. And of course, if it's something related to your team or personal, you can always email or phone call to me. Okay, so let me stop and see if that's where we are. If we have any questions here. As I said, I know how different Decisions First is from most software you've ever used, on purpose. It's hard to find software that lets you frame a problem. And I saw some very good postings in the discussion area, some links to additional information about the DMN, the Decision Modeling Notation. Mr. Taylor is president of the organization that's pushing the DMN standard to be the decision-making modeling thing, and it's been adopted as the standard. And a lot of organizations are starting to jump on board and say, we want to use that. His software is one way of formalizing the DMN kind of notation, decision modeling notation. I think it'll catch on. I think organizations who want to apply an evidence-based decision-making have got to find some way to frame the decision before they start building the models. And I've not seen anything better than Decisions First. You can say, well, it needs some improvements and some tweaks. If you have ideas for improvements, Mr. Taylor would love to hear them because he obviously wants his product to be successful in the real world. And I think we're fortunate that we get to use it for free myself because I don't have anything to supply that's better. If I did, I would use it. I'm very easily switched over to better products, so something better may come along. But right now, I think Decisions First, even with its frailties, is better than anything I've seen in terms of that aspect, framing the problem. Remember how hard this is. You're framing a problem. You say, here's our decision, or here's our challenge, or here's our opportunity, whatever it is. Here are the kinds of information we're going to need to do it. Here's who's going to do it. Here's when they're going to do it. Here's how they're going to do it. Here are the pieces that are going to be somewhat subjective based on experience and based on knowledge. Here are the pieces that are going to be more objective, rules, regulations, requirements, laws. Here is the analytical piece that supports it. We need to know this and that before we can make this offer. Here are the sub-decisions. That's quite a bit, especially if you do drill down a little bit and look at all the specifics you can put into some of those things. It's pretty impressive when you get finished with it, especially if you had a real-world problem where people were leaving a meeting with 15 different views of what the problem really was and who was going to do it and how it was going to get done. That's where you see the value. Having been in organizations almost always that were like that, where we had a meeting and somebody said, here's the problem, and we had 15 views of what we were going to do and how we're going to do it. And again, it's an iterative thing where you try to get buy-in and get everyone to agree and collaborate and cross-functional lines. So I think it has a lot of value. Okay, well, I haven't seen anyone posting any questions. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the sharing. Let's do that first. And then I'm going to go ahead. I see, okay, Shara. Shara says her company is working with IBM on big data and data analytics. They may have scored you. What is your company, Shara? I've forgotten already. If you don't mind my asking. Oh, Geico. Well, hey, your commercials, gee whiz. Your commercials occupy about half the airtime on TV. I think so. I would love to see the evidence of whether how you measure the effectiveness of the commercials and the products. That would be great. I think insurance companies are probably one of the leaders in making use of analytics. Healthcare being another leader. Finance companies, another leader. But everyone else is going to come along too. I've just been looking at articles about analytics and manufacturing. There's analytics in just about everything. But I think clearly there's some industries and some companies that are farther ahead than others. So it'd be interesting, I'm sure. I hope you get access to some of the information in your company. Okay, well, thank you very much. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. That's my next step.